All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ashley Horan. I am the Executive Director of MUUSJA, the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance. It is my great pleasure to be here tonight with my co-host for this evening and future host of these convening calls, Pastor Danny Gibbons. Hi, Danny.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Danny is our brand new statewide organizer here at MUUSJA, and he is the first organizer that we've had. This has been a one-person shop for a long time, and it's super exciting that we have two of us now, co-conspirators and collaborators and mischief makers in the work. So Danny is going to be working with our statewide ministry in a lot of ways. He'll be working with our more rural congregations, and he'll also be helping us with our interfaith organizing that happens throughout the state, but a lot of that happens here in the Twin Cities as well. So Danny, I just, before we move much further, I want to turn it over to you for a second and to just introduce yourself, anything that you want folks to know as we get started tonight.
Well, first of all, I'm excited and just grateful to have an opportunity to do this convening call with everyone and to be in this new position as a statewide organizer with MUUSJA. I'm excited to see how things unfold as we go through these monthly calls and kind of unpack some of the stuff that we do with MUUSJA. So I'm just at a place of real excitement right now. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We are so thrilled to have you and everything that you bring. Danny has a background as a pastor and as a social justice activist. You probably know his face from workshops in your congregations or on the front lines of Black Lives Matter protests over the couple last years. So we are extremely honored and lucky to have Danny working with us now. And as I said, Danny's going to be doing these convening calls for us every month. And our convening calls are monthly 90-minute Zoom calls that are open to anybody who wants to join, but we usually take either a pressing social justice issue that's coming up in the moment and do some education around it, figure out, hear from folks who are really deep in the trenches in that work, or we take a social justice leadership issue and try and do a little bit of capacity building and training around some things so that we are equipping Unitarian Universalists and beyond for really social justice work. So more about future calls in a minute. I also want to acknowledge that we have Nancy Heege here tonight, who is here to listen in on the conversation, but also we're going to throw her a question or two along the way. Nancy formerly served on the congregational life staff of the Mid-America region, and before that, the Prairie Star District. The other secret is that she was my director of religious education when I was a tiny child at Unity Church in St. Paul. So I've known Nancy for a long time. We're glad to see your face here too, Nancy. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Danny, to get us started with a little chalice lighting.
All right. So I don't know if you all can see my chalice. I'm going to lift it up. I'll light this. See if we can get it to light. There we go. And tonight's chalice reading comes from Lisa Dogie. It says, why a flaming chalice? The question comes. It's the cup of life, we answer. A cup of blessings overflowing. A cup of water to quench our spirit's thirst. A cup of wine for celebration and dedication. The flame of truth, the fire of purification. Oil for anointing, healing. Out of chaos, fear, and horror. Thus was the symbol crafted a generation ago. So may it be for us. In these days of uncertainty, sorrow, and rage, and a light to warm our souls and guide us home. So that was a chalice lighting reading from Lisa Dogie.
Lisa Day, actually.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. She's our colleague who serves the UU Church in Nora.
Pronounce it again for me, please.
Lisa Day, as in
Day. Okay.
Not night.
Got you. All right. And so just going to do a brief check-in. I know we shared a little bit already, Nancy. We're just taking time to just check in. I know that you're a member of Unity, but just take time to check in with us. What's going on with you? How are you doing?
I just turned my microphone back on, so otherwise I'll keep it muted. I'm retired now and leading a a happy life, and busy with a number of things, including some volunteer work that I'm doing at elementary school in their library, trying to help the librarian there who has a lot of work to do. And realizing that one of the things that I want to spend time doing during my retirement is working for justice in the world, that I didn't have a lot of time when I was doing a lot of traveling and so on. I was working with congregations, and topics would come up then, and we would, do some things with that. But basically now, because of my grandchildren, because of my interest in the future of our country, it's time for me to spend some time working for justice. So that's me.
Thank you.
And for my part, I do this work professionally and have for several years now of, ministering to and with church folks who are working for justice and broader movements for justice who need that sort of spiritual care and grounding. And my working mantra right now is that we're all taking shifts for the revolution. So, union organizing gave us this idea of the 3 8-hour chunks in a day. You've got a chunk for leisure and family, you've got a chunk for sleep and rest, and you've got a chunk for work. And in times that are as critical and dangerous as those that we're living in now, to me, it's like a spiritual obligation to show up for my shift, right? Like when it's my turn to work and do whatever it is that I'm uniquely called to do. I need to be well rested. I need to be skilled. I need to be trained. I need to be my best self. And so, figuring out how to do that, how to turn it off when it's not my shift, but also how to, in the midst of all that's going on, how to take self-care, not as a indulgent kind of capitalist thing about, buying stuff or paying for services that make you feel more isolated, but really about how do I find deeper connection, deeper grounding. And I admire Danny's ministry so much, and I'm really looking forward to having him teach us some things tonight. How about you, Danny? Why this topic for your first convening call?
This topic for my first convening call just really reflects where I am in my own personal walk, and where just after doing organizing in the community and abroad, it just was one of those things where I realized that it's been this thing that's really been a hindrance to the movement in a way that is just unreal. So I wanted to choose that as this first topic, especially when looking at what happened in Charlottesville and other places like that. So, but I wanted to open up with really kind of speaking to the issue that happened in Charlottesville that we saw, where white nationalists gathered to do their little rallying and their hate speech and all the rhetoric that they were doing to speak against particular groups of people, and to just further spread their nonsense. And it broke out in racialized violence and melee, and we saw there was a death of a young lady and several others that were injured as a result of a white nationalist riding through a crowd full of people with his car. I mean, a white nationalist that has had history. And when I talk about white nationalists, we're talking about white supremacists that are openly, vocal about who they are and what they stand for. So, with that being kind of a pulse in this world, there's also those of us who have a pulse that is connected to the holy, that's connected to the sacred, that is connected to this larger picture of humanity that believe that, the arc of the universe, the moral arc of the universe is bent towards justice. And so with that, it's okay, we understand that it's bent towards justice, but there are those, as Ashley talked about earlier, that are unaware of how to kind of work those shifts and how to prevent compassion fatigue, how to prevent burnout in these ways, how to prevent or even decrease issues with anxiety or depression, just the ways in which this work can bleed in. And so I think it's important for those of us who are doing work with oppressed communities, who are doing work in marginalized communities, who are doing work in this, this post-racialized kind of era that we're living in, those of us who are doing that work, need to have that discipline that's developed. And so it's kind of my motivation in it all. So that's what I was thinking.
That's great, Danny. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, we see this all the time with folks, and in particular with Unitarian Universalists, I think, who, we tend to be largely white, largely economically privileged, largely educated, and we have a lot of, on the whole, of course, there are exceptions. Everybody's got stories and their personal narrative, but on the whole, we tend to be people who have not dealt with the sort of day-to-day struggle of what it means to stay alive in the face of either people or systemic forces that want to see us extinguished. For people who come from poor communities or communities of color or undocumented communities, it's a different reality day to day. And I think we all develop different bandwidth for dealing with what is in front of us. And so I think for UUs right now, for the majority of folks, that bandwidth is being tested in a way that it hasn't for a long time, So like the reaction that we saw from UUs after the election, for example, in November of last year was shock and horror and real devastation. And that's not to say that that didn't come from folks in marginalized communities. It certainly did, but it was also it was a surprise to many UUs in a way that it was not a surprise to groups that have been dealing with systems for a long time. So yeah, I'm really interested, Danny, and I'll turn it over to you now to just, teach us a little bit about the frameworks that you've been working with and how you react to them.
Well, and speaking specifically to the UU community, in my work with the UU community over the past 4 years now that my church has been planted in sharing community and space in a UU church in St. Paul, I've seen how groups like Standing on the Side of Love and other groups that come from underneath the UU umbrella really show up in real ways for issues that are concerning the climate, issues that are concerning immigration, issues concerning voting rights, issues concerning discrimination, all of those things. But seeing it more close to home in my spiritual community at Unity and above every name, my church, seeing folks in the hallway or during coffee hour that are just like laden, their affect is just like worn with fatigue, worn with anxiety, worn with dismay, appalled, just growing, weary by this. And so it was this thing that really just, that has moved me. And so there's a story called The Goose Story that I think really adds value to it and will give us kind of this objective kind of view on it. So Ashley, if you would read The Goose Story for me, that'd be great.
Happy to do that. So this is by Dr. Harry Clark Noyes. Next fall, when you see geese heading south for the winter, flying along in V formation, you might consider what science has discovered as to why they fly that way. As each bird flaps its wings, it creates an uplift for the bird immediately following. By flying in V formation, the whole flock adds at least 71% greater flying range than if each bird flew on its own. When a goose falls out of formation, it suddenly feels the drag and resistance of trying to go it alone, and it quickly gets back into formation to take advantage of the lifting power of the bird in front. When the head goose gets tired, it rotates back in the wing, and another goose flies point. Geese honk from behind to encourage those up front to keep up their speed. Finally, and this is important, when a goose gets sick or is wounded by gunshots and falls out of formation, two other geese fall out with that goose and follow it down to lend help and protection. They stay with the fallen goose until it's able to fly or until it dies. Only then do they launch out on their own or with another formation to catch up with their group.
Thank you, Ashley. And this story really speaks to me when I think about, I reflect upon the work that we've done in the Twin Cities of organizing and this collective effort, this interfaith, intersectional table that has come to the forefront, not just only protesting in the streets, but come to the forefront and holding space in spiritual communities and sacred, gathering spaces and congregations and synagogues and mosques, and seeing folks be, fly in that V formation to maintain the kind of momentum that has carried us here in this locale to a place to where it feels like we've gained some momentum. But I'm thinking about folks like my sister Nancy, who shared that she's doing work on the front line of Obama Elementary and the work that she's doing in other spiritual communities and congregations, and of how that work can not only be cumbersome, but also seem to be isolated and siloed and appear to be as if like you're just only kind of by yourself, or like somehow you've fallen out of formation because this collective effort of justice doesn't have the same kind of momentum on the education front as it does, say, for instance, on police brutality front here. And so with looking at that and understanding that, it really spoke to me strongly about what it means for us to maintain a sense of connection in community, connection to one another in the work, and understanding what happens when we do fall out of formation. You back, Nancy? All right, we good. We're still here. So as I was saying, we're talking about just how it feels to be what seems to be isolated in this effort, because this battlefield is so big. There's so many different issues, from the educational standpoint, from the environmental standpoint, to getting into mass incarceration, immigration. I mean, there's so many different fronts that we all occupy. Many of us occupy multiple fronts. Some have been, at the helm of only one particular front. And so when it talks about becoming weary, when the head goose gets tired, there's been this motto in doing this kind of work that you just have to keep going, that, you don't have the gift of saying no, that there is no such thing as time out. I mean, the issues are many, and there's not enough of us that are working. And so if I do get tired, then this is a sign of weakness of me as a person on the forefront, whether I'm a leader or just a lay person. This is a sign of defeat or failure. Like, it begins to communicate a number of different things that aren't necessarily real, but when the fatigue sets in, it's almost as if our perception of our work and our proximity to it and how long we've been in it then grows jaded. And so it says now we have to be able to take that time out to take a pause. But then there's also this piece when we're on the front line to be able to hear the honking of those who are behind us in this work that we may not necessarily see on a day-to-day basis. These are the folks that may, send an email or may respond in a direct message or a tweet, or may, post something under a Facebook post just thinking for you, or a prayer hand emoji, or whatever that is, sending healing love or energy to you. These are the folks that are part of the V formation that we have collectively on this justice front. And in one of the sacred writings, it talks about a great cloud of witnesses. And those who have gone before us that in some respects are like in this hallmark, or this corridor of cheering us on and encouraging us. But we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in a way to where we can hear that honking, when we can hear the encouragement of Reverend Ashley's being grateful for the work of Miss Nancy and the Director of Religious Education and that kind of stuff. Like that's honking in the V formation that we need to know and we need to hear. And finally, it says that the reality is that in this work, we will get sick. Sometimes we're wounded. We're not exempt from such. It isn't. I wish the sacred, I wish the ancestors and the holy in this work was like, you know what, you get a kind of carefree, anxiety-free, depression, worry-free card because you're doing this work. But unfortunately, it seems like we get a subscription to a lifetime subscription to what it seems like, angst and, being on the edge of this. But it says that when one of us is wounded or becomes sick and falls out of formation, that it's not just one person's duty, but that we're going in twos. There's folks coming out to assist in the work, and not just to show up and in an eventful kind of way, but to show up in a way that says, I'm present. I'm here now with you. We're here now together, and being present until that person is either released to move on or released to transition into this next phase of the work. And it speaks to this whole notion of what I call, or not what I call, what my teachings have taught me about the ABCs of self-care. This real simple thing that I use to just keep me just connected and attuned to where I am in my body. And so when we talk about the ABCs of self-care, this work is one where I've been taught that compassion is the ability to love somebody or something with the foreknowledge that it will hurt you. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely had, my fair share of hurt from, the love of the people that I have in this work, of, oftentimes that we see how infighting or the fatigue creates we're short with one another, or flippant, or we're snarky, or we just shut down and don't give of ourselves, and we may be flippant with our remarks, or we may be distant, not necessarily responding in ways that we normally would, and that's the first letter in the ABCs of self-care is A. It stands for awareness. And awareness talks about really, it's a locator for you. It becomes a true north for us in doing this work. Oftentimes this work can draw us from horizon to horizon, and we don't know up from down, right from left. And awareness allows us to be able to find this space and place to where we know where the true north is. I was just blessed to have an opportunity to go to Auburn Seminary to participate in a workshop for organizers and activists that are doing organizing and activism in kind of this hostile environment and climate that we're living in right now. And one of the things that it really helped me to see was that I wasn't the only one out here doing work. And I knew that I wasn't the only one out here doing work, but you know how when you are doing the work and you get caught up in kind of the rhythm of it or the life of the work, it sometimes can feel like, there's times where it's just like, it's only me. And the folks that say that they were with you may be in a space and place where they're reactive to the work, and it doesn't feel as close as it used to be. The intimacy has changed. The dynamics have changed. The pressure, the demands of it, and just because the demands change doesn't necessarily mean that we have more supply as human beings in doing this work. And so awareness is this locator of being able to say to yourself, I'm tired, be able to say, to give yourself permission to be tired, as, as Reverend Ashley talked about earlier, with working the shifts of that time of rest and how important that is. I believe it's Audre Lorde that says that, self-care is a revolutionary act. It's not a moment of self-indulgence. This is revolutionary. Like, this is what makes the work magical, is this ability to be aware of who I am in the work, where I am in the context of my body and my being. How am I showing up? How is the work impacting my household, my day-to-day life? What am I shutting off the work? Do I have healthy boundaries with myself in the work? Is the work so overwhelming and so consuming that when I wake up for my midnight bath breaks that I get, that I'm thinking about the work and I'm not really taking time out to go back and enjoy the rest that my body so desperately needs? And awareness is about telling the truth. It's the most important ingredient is truth telling. We talk about this, truth telling in kind of activist and organizing work, truth telling, speak truth to power, but we oftentimes don't tell ourselves the truth. And again, that goes back to being able to say, I'm tired. I need a break.
Danny, can I jump in here for a second?
Sure, please.
I think that is so powerful, this piece, because what I'm actually hearing you talking about here is like, it's awareness of self and your needs, right, in any given moment, but it's also about humility, right? It's about acknowledging the limits. So, if we go back to your V formation metaphor with the geese, right? Like, what happens if that front goose doesn't want to acknowledge that they're that they're in trouble. They shouldn't be leading anymore, or, I'm thinking about this sort of, charismatic leader model, that, we do this all the time, right? In retrospect, we make charismatic leaders, and we put everything on them, right? We do this all the time with Dr. King. We do it in any number of places. And this is one of the complaints, right, about the Black Lives Matter movement is it doesn't have any leaders. Who can we go to? Who will give us the quotes? And instead that the response has always been, it is a leaderful movement. But in order to be a part of a leaderful moment, you have to have the humility to acknowledge when it's time for you to punch out and let somebody else in. I'm wondering, Danny, if you and I both have small children, right? We've got kids who are 3 and under. We've both, I brought Aspen to the Mall of America protest when she was 11 days old. That was her first public outing. And so clearly there are lines that we blur, right? Our kids are part of our work. Our families are part of our work. And yet I know you and I both work hard to kind of draw those lines too about not letting it bleed over all the time. And so I'm curious if you have some stories about moments when you have used your own awareness and either pulled back more or leaned in more.
It speaks to the piece about, when you grow sick or you grow wounded in the geese metaphor. I think about the 4th precinct occupation, and as I was sharing earlier about truth telling, my wife Natasha and I were just in kind of the courting dating stage at that time, and I was at this space in my life where, as a part of my spiritual self-care practice, was telling the truth. And so I really shared the truth with Tasha, kind of where I was. I don't know how to cut it off. I get out there and I'm just in it, and I'm unending the fires that burned in front of the precinct. And so I had asked her to be my accountability partner, to assist me, to draw me back in. And so that was about this empowering kind of thing and so we were out there one particular night, and it was I was out there probably until about 4 a.m. I made a Facebook Live video, and you could see in my eyes, I'm just wiped out. I'm frustrated. They just sprayed us with tear gas, all that stuff. And it's cold out there. They're coming out and putting out fire, all this stuff. And I'm upset because I feel alone. I feel like I'm the only clergy of color that's out there on the front line. And though there were others, I wanted more, and it was I was crying out, and I vented in what was, I look back now, it's somewhat irrational. I was kind of aggressive in a way, why aren't you out here? But my wife had saw the video and immediately called me and was like, you need to come home. You need to come home now. You have a little boy that needs you. I need you. You don't look good. You look like you need some rest. You're not going to be good to the people out there if you're not taking care of yourself. And so I went home on that particular night, and we talked about how can I take a break? How can I take a time? I mean, we're in the height of it, in the thick of it all. I think we're now in maybe close to day 10 or something like that. So it was really, we're in it. And we were offered I was offered an opportunity by one of the allies, said, hey, we have a space that you can kind of, if any activists ever want to get away to do some self-care, they can go. Tasha knew about it. And she was like, we should, take some time and just get away for a couple of days. I mean, the reality is that the occupation didn't look like it was ending anytime soon. Long story short, we took 3 days away, and I shut off my phone, and I didn't respond to social media. I didn't go looking for the stories. I wasn't responding to text, and I just was there. I didn't suppress my feelings. My shoulders were tight talking about it. I didn't suppress how I was feeling. If in that moment when she and I were together, I felt like crying, I cried. I allowed myself to be fully human and fully present with all that and that again is a part of that truth telling. And being this, that's when it really began for me.
What's so deep about this, Danny, is that I think, when I heard the word awareness, when you first used it, like I was thinking self-awareness, right? Like you understand yourself and you have to have the awareness about all this other stuff. You're telling the story about engaging other people and those deep relationships that you built before a crisis, right? Like you're not trying to reach out to new things in that moment. Like you've got the foundation there, but those are the people, Tasha and some of the other folks who are around at that moment who are able to reflect back to you and be awareness for you, right? So awareness is not an independent thing. Awareness is like a radically interdependent resource.
It is, and it's about, we in the social service field, I have a therapeutic background, and so they talk about having, kind of these safety plans for folks that not only do crisis work, but even for clients that were oftentimes maybe dealing with suicidal ideations, and so that plan was real, and I applied that to my personal life because of the enormity of the work. I had to. And I had to invite someone else in to be not only in close enough proximity to me to be aware of it, but that I trusted, that I valued, that I could hear, and it didn't sound like somebody who was saying that, I didn't have what it took to finish out the job. And that really speaks to the second letter in the ABCs of self-care. The B stands for balance. And this balance in life comes from that when you get to a place of truth telling, the truth has a way of just kind of evening you out, regardless of, how you, it just has like, you're going to have to settle one way or another about it. And having balance isn't necessary, isn't just solely about like my disposition. I have, kind of this peace. I can ground myself and get to this space of, spiritual, tap into my chi or whatever that is. Balance is, again, understanding when we're in moments of our life where we feel like we're in a felt minus in the work, when it feels like our efforts aren't enough. And the reality and the truth of the matter is you've been at this thing for 6 years, you've been at this thing for 6 months, you've been at this thing for 10 years, that the amount of time invested would never tell that narrative. But when we're out, when there's an imbalance in our life, the narrative doesn't show up rationally. And so it's about this, getting to this place of not only where do you find balance, but how do you maintain it? So balance for me personally in the work came from, one, telling myself the truth, and then it came from being able to pause, to like really pause and take an account. I've done it maybe 2 or 3 times in the work. And one of the more recent times, again, I was talking about was in Auburn, had a time to reflect upon, wow, I was present for this. Wow, I assisted in that. Wow, this, and all of these wonderful, amazing relationships that were created, and how that I can use the integrity of the relationships that were established to maintain that balance, to have those relationships not solely be around the work. Balance for me came in, for example, when I met Lena Gardner, and we started doing the work together in BLM, organizing on the grounds. We had to step aside from the work and get to know who we were individually. I wanted to know Lena as a person, so that I can support her as a person in this work, and how she shows up, her identity. Balance allows me to make room for someone else. It speaks to that humility that you were talking about earlier, Ashley. Balance gives me that opportunity to make room for someone else. And so that becomes this grounding piece, because there's the only anchor point in this work is love. A love for justice, a love for truth, a love for hope, a love for change, all those things. So there's not a lot of anchor points.
And a love for people, because my God, you might not like everybody all the time, but you better damn well love each other if you're going to be able to help maintain the balance, right? I mean, and I think we got to be real about this, right? Like there's this sort of like myth in American culture about how we're supposed to have balance, right? Especially for like, I think the sort of American dream of like what your life looks like when you have it all figured out is this like very kind of, it's like a veneer, right? It's not very deep. It's just like, balance looks like having all your bills paid on time and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I think the reality is that, like, I think we gauge balance over time. Like, it's not just that, like, any moment you are perfectly in equilibrium, but it's like, am I anchored enough so that I've always got the relationships to pull me back when I'm reaching out to the edge? Is it, you know, I might work 4 nights in 1 week, but the next week, am I going to prioritize being with my family? Like, it doesn't look the same every single 24-hour chunk of your life, but that sort of like tendency toward equilibrium and balance over the long haul. So that, you know, in a lot of ways, it's like we're storing up reserves. So, like, you know, you had enough reserves to get to day 10 of that occupation. Holy crap, that's a lot of reserves, Danny. I mean, like, you know, there's the significant trauma happening like all the time. This is a 24-hour thing. I mean, like, you know, and I think that, you know, when we come back to this sort of like awareness piece, the balance is really about like, what's in the reserves? What's in the bank account that you have to draw on when you've got the unexpected, you know, expense of energy or heart or emotion or whatever.
And balance comes in. I think I heard this from you, Ashley, when you said that Oprah says that no is a complete sentence. Was that you, Ellen? And that balance of no, of just really how grounding that is for you as an individual, as a person, not only in this work, but just in your own life. Like, just to be able to just say no. I mean, and how that reminds you, it gets you back to that awareness. It's that thing of how all this stuff is, as we know, is interconnected and linked in real ways.
Do you just mind if I ask a question about that?
Is that Karen Wills on the phone?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, yeah.
Welcome, we're glad to see you.
Thank you. It's really, you have no idea how incredibly helpful and timely it is to hear you experts discussing these issues tonight. This is so great.
I don't know about experts, but pontificators, yes.
Oh my God. I just had a question about for you and Danny about whether just to go back to this idea of, you know, you don't have to like everybody, but you know, you still love them, and also saying no. So I'm really scared right now because I just did something I've never done before, and I put my name as the person whose name is on the reservation form for the state capitol for this rally, right? That I've organized for the 14th of October, and like I'm out there, and this group of amazing people is helping to organize this, but I just sent it in, I mean, literally tonight, right before this call started. And now I'm like really scared because most of the group is wonderful, but there are a couple of people in this organizing group who are, I'm a little bit concerned about the extent to which they are truly on board with, having the rally really, kind of follow the rules. And I'm sorry to sound like such a fucking Girl Scout, but at the same time, I really don't want this to sort of turn into something that is, super violent or disruptive, or something that like the majority of this group is really committed to, to having things be, to go really well and be something that we're going to feel really good about having done the day after it's over. And the goal of the group is to be able to, appreciate and respect, and, you know, for many of us, even love one another, you know, the day after this event is over, and to go forward as a very intentionally multi-ethnic, multicultural, multiracial, multi-age, multi-geographic, suburban and urban, et cetera, planning group. And it's one of the most amazing things that I've ever been part of. And yet, at the same time, there are one or two people who, you know, when we start talking about permitting, for example, are like, you know, rolling their eyes and like, fuck permitting, and, you know, and we're saying, oh, it's going to be a rally, not a march. We're not shutting down any streets there, you know, like, you know, fuck that. We're going to do what we want to do. And I'm just like, oh my God, I just put my name on this thing. And now all of a sudden I'm panicking, and that, you know, that, I don't know. And at the same time feeling sort of ashamed of my panic.
Well, can I share this with you first? Congratulations. Yeah. Welcome. You know, that was your initiated by fire. So welcome.
Honk, 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 honk. I don't know if you were on the line for the goose story earlier, Karen, but we'll honk.
I know the goose. I love the goose story. I wasn't, but I came in later. But yeah, it's a great story. Yeah. Yeah, and it has not. I have not been the front goose generally. I've been in the crowd a lot, but you know, but I have not tended to be the goose out in front. And even in this group, I mean, my role in this group is you know, I just signed the papers because I, you know, knew how to do that, but I'm sort of serving as the secretary and convener, and I don't know, kind of the mom, you know, just basically being able to hold the group together and hold the group to this vision of that the most important thing is how we feel about each other.
Let me give you a couple key little points I'll say to you. Is this, in looking at with doing actions and things like this, first of all, fear is a normal thing. It's totally normal, you know, and it's a human thing. That's not a sign of weakness. That actually speaks to more about the awareness that we were talking about in self-care and the truth telling to yourself about kind of where you are. The other piece is around having faith in the process. You know, you signed your name on that because you have faith in the fact of what you believe in and what you're passionate about, this rally. The truth of the matter is, I wish I could tell you that the day after you're going to feel amazing. I heard you say, I want to feel good about it. We want to feel good about it. Even if it goes like perfect and everything happens how you want to, and the Rainbow Push Coalition shows up, you're still going to have this thing on you where you're just like, and so just be ready for this work. And this is about the balance. So I appreciate you really like speaking to that, because balance it takes preparation. If you've ever had any kind of injury that offsets your equilibrium, if you've ever had any kind of core, you know, any issues with your core muscles or whatever, you know what it means to like regain your balance, the resiliency and the strength and the coordinated effort and all of the preparation that goes into it. And as it is with our bodies, so it is in our kind of day-to-day living and the things that we do. The final piece I want to speak about in the ABCs of self-care is the letter C, and that speaks to connection. Connection is the most important piece in this, in my personal opinion, because again, we don't want to find ourselves being islands. I think of some of what Nancy shared about her work that she does at Obama, and then hearing what you're talking about, Ms. Karen, with this action that's coming up, the pressure and all of the happenings, the TikToks and all of the people and the personalities and all of that can cause you seriously to just be like, you know, I'm just going to isolate. I'm going to be, you know, away by myself. And in this work, it is not safe to isolate. It really is not. As in the goose story, when it talked about when one gets sick or wounded, that there needs to be two other geese that accompany. As a practice of connectedness and getting to know one another during the 4th precinct occupation, we would for the younger identified folks, and even the older identified folks that were women or of queer identity, that we made sure that, you know, that there were folks that escorted them to their cars, and not just like kind of walked them like we were the CIA, but, you know, engaged them, talked with them, spoke with them about, you know, how did it feel to be present at the precinct, you know, and that speaks to that builds up even more community and connection in that way, because not only do we feel this sense of caring, but it's this sense of now I'm connected around values as well as my humanity that we think about.
Yeah, and Danny, I think this ties back to, because it's not just about like the connections to people being incredibly important, because they are. It's, in my experience, I'm going to tell another story here about the 4th Precinct. It's actually the people who are not connected who are the least trustworthy, right? So like this thing, Karen, you're talking about this story of these couple of people who like have not managed to get on board or get in line. And it's not actually about like everybody being ideologically like the same, but it's about the trust, right? That connection builds. And if you don't, like, I can have political differences, tactical differences with somebody, but if I trust them at the end of the day, like I'm going to take way more risk. So I'm thinking of one of the nights at the 4th Precinct, I was down there, and me and a couple of friends, we spot this like white guy all by himself, just kind of like walking around the fringes. And we immediately were like, you know, this was right after the shootings had happened, the white supremacists had come in. We knew that there were infiltrators, and it was like bizarre. And so immediately, you know, all of us knew that anybody who's walking around there alone that looks like they are not connected to anybody, those are people that we watch. And so we literally, like me and my 2 friends, we went up to this guy and we're like, hey, how you doing? Who are you here with? What are you doing here? What are you here for? You know, and like, and he got more and more squirrely. And then more and more people who saw that that was what we were doing came and joined us in that. And it was like, ultimately, we ended up literally like surrounding him, not being anywhere near him, but being like 3 or 4 feet away from him. And he just started walking away because he couldn't bear to actually have to engage in connective anything with us. And we walked him like out of that, you know, the blockade or whatever. We ended up seeing him get in a cop car like 2 blocks away. But you know what I mean? Like, Danny, maybe you can speak to this too, like how the unconnected people are actually the ones who we trust less.
And that becomes important. There was so many kind of moments and incidents like that. And what it reminded me of, it was taking it even a little further about, you know, this interconnectedness with your passions and your values around the work, that even in moments like that, like even if that gentleman didn't know anybody on the side, was able to say from a place of real connectedness with the issues, like, you know, I'm here because I'm tired of seeing systemic, you know, whatever that was. And then I think about in this work of being able to do this work with trusted, you know, colleagues or folks that you know that you can lean on. The BLM Minneapolis chapter started here, and it was a bunch of people that folks thought knew each other, and some kind of knew each other and whatever, but for the most part, it was a group of folks that didn't know each other. So we had to learn, you know, trust, and that had to be developed through this connectedness. I think about the story of an action that we did, one of the last kind of big actions that we did when we shut down the airport in Minneapolis for Black Christmas too. And this was a coordinated effort with a number of different groups and whatnot. And I was one of the lead cars, Reverend Ashley was one of the lead cars, and I think there was another car. And, you know, Reverend Ashley had like family in her car, I believe. And, you know, and so it was kind of one of those things. And I like was depending upon like her car. Like I knew I was going to turn and be this person that was going to block traffic. But if she didn't turn to block traffic with me, there would have been, you know, it would have been catastrophic. But in that moment, it was this kind of connectedness. And I don't know if you remember, Reverend Ashley, but I remember looking over out the window at you and just seeing you, and was like, this is happening. And you had this look like, and I was like, yeah. And there was a connection that was, my fear was present, Nancy. You know what I'm saying? you know, all of the things that people were talking about, Karen, that y'all are crazy. We shouldn't go. Why are we going to the airport? That's not going to bring nothing. That's not going to change no laws or no legislation or whatnot. Like, there was all of that. But there was also this moment of connectedness that just where we were our ancestors' wildest dreams in that moment.
Yes.
And I know that's kind of a grand example, but I believe that particular moment couldn't have happened had there not been, again, this interconnectedness that we had individually, and this kind of interconnectedness with the larger community and values thereof.
Yeah, and I mean, when I tell that story, it's about how I missed the briefing meeting because I was late. And so somebody was like, "You're driving." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." They're like, "We can't tell you the details because we know that there's an infiltrator here," and they're like trying to figure out what the plans are. So I'm like, "Okay, great, I'll get in my car." But yeah, Danny, that thing about like literally looking each other in the eye there and like looking around and seeing, you know, Aluchi and Jai were there and like a bunch of other people that we knew. And it was like, okay, I like literally did not know what the plan was. I had no idea what was happening. And all of a sudden somebody's like flagging me to turn my car over traffic. And I'm like, okay, guess I got to make this decision right now. And the thing is, the connection there between us and like my deep trust in this movement, right? Of like, I had been at so many actions by that point, you know, and I trusted the leadership, right? You trusted the folks who were there enough to like do this too, right? And the connection to the people meant that I could jump over my like chattery white middle-class lady mind around like, well, I don't know if this is the appropriate tactic, blah, 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 blah. But I was just like, all right, Danny's telling me to do something. These people that I know and trust are telling me to do something. And like, I need to just be ready to do that. And it actually like kind of saved my soul in that moment of being like, all right, all right, God, I'm not sure what's going on here, but I'm going to say yes to this because I feel like I've been, you know, leading up to this for a while. And so, I mean, like this idea of self-care, I'm going to come back to this now because, you know, when you're in that adrenaline moment, sometimes it's the muscles that you've developed doing the self-care and again, self-care not being just about like yourself, but yourself in relationship with the constellation of community, right? When that network, when those, you know, connections, that awareness, that balance is strong enough, when you get into those kind of emergency moments, like it's muscle memory. You don't have to think your way through it. Like there's a posture that's ready to go.
Definitely. And that's where the resiliency comes from. You know, the awareness, the balance, and the connection creates the resiliency and the sustainability in the work. It's what gives us permission to show up, or it gives us permission to, you know what, pull out of the lead kind of role and let me fall back in formation and just flap my wings. I may fall back and be supporting, you know, via social media. I may fall back and support from another standpoint. I may do door knocking. I may fall back by having, you know, dinner with a friend that has some views that are, you know, and it becomes this way of self-care, of knowing like at this point where I am, I got to pull back. And so I think that right now is a great time to kind of transition into asking everybody that's here, do you currently have a daily spiritual practice of self-care? And if so, please share.
Karen, let's go to you first. Nancy, welcome back. Danny just asked the question, do we have a daily spiritual practice of self-care in some way? And Karen, let's go to you first.
Oh, gosh. No, I don't. It depends on what, I have things that I do for self-care, but my daily schedule is so erratic, and I'm so overextended at the moment that the only I mean, basically no, I don't. I really don't. Yeah.
I think that's fair. And I think in a minute, I think we should talk about how real self-care should not come with shame, because I think, or when we don't do it well, because there's all this talk about, well, do you have this and this and this and this and this in line? And I think sometimes that can even shift over to be like, you should be ashamed of yourself if you don't do it. And so we'll get there in a minute. Danny, I just inserted that into the agenda.
Yeah, well, and the thing is too that it is, well, so here's the thing for weird, I mean, the organizing that I've been doing, my hobby of being a social justice volunteer organizer person has been for me, and really until the last couple of weeks, that has been my self-care from the demands of my day job, which doesn't directly have anything to do with any of that. And so I guess what I'm so overloaded with, and what I'm being incoherent about tonight, is that just within this past week or two, I now need to sort of figure out some kind of way to do self-care from the organizing work, where for me the organizing work has been my spiritual practice. It's been what I've been doing to be able to deal with how horrible the world has become, and to take a break from like my day job, which is working in a hospital. So I work with sick kids all the time, and the world is starting to suck politically for taking care of my kids. And so I do all this, so I got involved in all this social justice organizing stuff as a hobby and a sort of, recreation in a way, and an action to make it better for my kids. And now I've gotten so involved with that I'm like completely exhausted, and I'm also going out and doing things that now are actually moving out of my own comfort zone, and so now all of a sudden, instead of it being the self-care, I need like self-care from it. So I got to rethink that. Anyway, sorry to take so much time on that, but yeah.
It's interesting to hear you say that, and I appreciate you sharing your truth around it. I think it's it has the potential to be very dangerous when we make a hobby of it. And I know, well, I can say I don't know, but I think it's this, when doing this kind of work, because there's so many kind of connecting points for it that show up of being able to feel like it's redemptive, reclamative, there's reconciliation, there's all of these things that like have these feel good points to it. And I think we maybe underestimate the power of how taxing and how toxic and how tyrannical, activism and organizing kind of work can be, or even doing frontline work for groups of folks who have just been oppressed. And I definitely agree with Ashley talking about the shaming around self-care. But it's this getting to this place of the work can't be more important than that. Though the demand is there, and we can't allow the demand, because we can't allow the demand to supersede the supply of work we've done on ourselves. Because what will happen, Karen, and what will happen, Nancy, is those folks that, are at least look like they're on the same side as us will more and more look like the enemy, and our fatigue and irritability and, displacement of emotions and so forth and so on. And so that's where it becomes really kind of prickly. So we have to be careful there.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy.
Yeah, for sure.
Nancy, do you have any daily spiritual practice of self-care?
I do. It's a gratitude practice, and it's actually online with a group of people, some of whom I've met in person and some of whom are friends of those people that I've never met. It's a group on Facebook, and every day, usually at the end of the day, sometimes other times during the day, we check in about what we're grateful for. And it's a way of staying grounded in gratitude at times when you're feeling tired, or the things you talked about, tired or irritable, or like nobody pays attention to what you're doing and you're working so hard at it, or it would be easy to get kind of bent out of shape. But this is a way of staying grounded in gratitude at least once during the day. And hopefully that leads to more moments like that throughout the day. This group has been going on, I think, for almost 5 years now. And almost every day, almost everybody checks in. So it's been an enriching thing, and I've enjoyed my participation in that.
That's amazing. I envy that that resource that you have. It reminds me of, I just recently was able to hear affirmation for some of the work that I've done as an organizer. And not that it hadn't happened, but one of the key things that you said about the group that you have is that some of the folks you know and some of the folks you don't know, but nonetheless, everybody is like kind of gathered around this particular thing. And I participated in a ritual ceremony a couple weeks ago where there was a gathering of organizers, and at the end, the facilitator just said thank you for the nights that you went without sleep. Thank you for the nights that you stood in faith, even though fear was all around. Like, just really affirm. And it was talking to a room full of people, but I heard it for myself. And it made me like really become more aware again of how I've heard my colleagues say this, but almost take it like, well, you're supposed, well, this is what we're supposed to do. We're colleagues in the work, and not really hear it as like, this is affirmation from someone. This is gratitude. This is something from someone that really shows up. So I appreciate you sharing that, the gratitude piece.
Thank you. Thanks.
You got anything for us, Reverend Ashley?
Yeah. It's different things for me at different points of time. Sometimes, like right now, over the summer and in these kind of months, my daily practice is gardening. Literally having my hands in the dirt and watching things grow slowly over time. And it matters that I pay attention to them. Like there are a lot of really powerful social justice metaphors in gardening. I also just I'm going to the gym and walking every day, which for me is so incredibly important because I spend so much time, I spend a lot of my time behind a computer and going to organizing meetings and doing one-to-ones with people. And I'm on my butt all day, most of the time. And, a thing that what's interesting is when I'm dedicated to it, I can always find the time every day to make it happen. And when I'm not, I'm no, there's no way I could fit this into my schedule. I just can't do it. A thing that I am coming to understand and appreciate more and more is that because we live in the world that we live in, when we're talking about social justice work, you can never have enough bandwidth to fix the problems, right? No matter how much of yourself and your time and your energy and your heart you give, there will always be more need. And so at a certain point, you have to figure out how much not can you give, but are you willing to give? Is it healthy to give? And so for me, working an 8-hour workday instead of a 9-hour workday and spending that extra hour at the gym is I have not made a concretely less tangible difference in the world because I didn't do that extra hour of work. But what I did do is I took care of myself in a way that helped me release some tension that probably made my body healthier in a way that I'm going to be able to show up longer, right? I'm better prepared for my next shift. How about you, my friend, Pastor Danny?
So I have a couple of different things. For me, water. I go and sit by water, and it's just, and that's my direct response when I'm aware of it in my body. When I'm aware, my body usually tells me that something. And so if I can get near some water, that becomes really real for me, and it helps me kind of move some stuff. Truth telling and transparency. For so long, I was kind of locked in the shame of my colorful background and having spent time away in prison and like being out here in the community amongst folks that, I didn't necessarily feel like I fitted in around. And feeling like I would be judged if people knew like the truth about my background, all that kind of crazy stuff. And so just being able to tell my truth without shame, telling my truth of what I don't know, what I'm not, good at as a practice of self-care. I'm blessed with this gift of charisma, but it's also a thing that creates a deficit for me. And so with that, I have to be aware of, when I'm allowing charisma to lead and do the work, and when I know, like, Danny, it's time to take a time out. And so I give myself permission to do that. The Jamar Clark, the 5th Precinct occupation, or 4th Precinct occupation, created a tradition for myself and my wife where once a year we, the week before Thanksgiving, we go away for 3 days, usually to a cabin or somewhere up north, and just shut down and shut away from the world and just be Danny, just be Tasha. And that becomes important. Now, in the meantime, in between time, I identify what Karen was saying about how the work can be self-care. Healing justice work is a form of self-care for me, because it's just every time I think that we engage in healing justice conversations, more healing comes. And so it's this, if I can give you a picture of what this looks like, with doing self-care as a daily spiritual practice, it's working on the plane while it's going down. There's going to be a time when we're going to have to go and put the oxygen mask on and then get back to work. And so making sure we're taking that time out. Now, some sessions may be a 2-minute session where we're taking some oxygen. Some may be 20, but making sure we're taking that time out. I wish I could have something every day for an hour or whatever that was, but I'm intentional about each day, even if it's only for 5 minutes of just unplugging. That becomes important to me. The next question that we got about maybe 15 minutes left on the call, is in what ways can a spiritual practice of self-care deepen your justice work? Karen, what do you got for us? Karen, you there?
Yeah, no, I'm right here. I just, okay, so, in my, a very large part of my daily life, is either being alone or being kind of one-on-one with a parent or a kid in my role as a professional. So it's sort of, it's a very tightly defined relationship, and it's not really a two-way mutual relationship as me being a care provider, right? So that's a very large chunk of my life. And I think that the piece of the work that I've been doing, especially trying to build this, what we're calling, it's the People's Coalition for Justice. And it's, all of these people who are leaders of multi-faith, multi-ethnic, multiracial groups from all over the metro, coming together to kind of work together and make this rally, and then hopefully stay together after this rally and go on doing this work together. Anyways, this group that I've gotten so committed to is a practice for me of kind of being in collaborative relationship with people that I'm really getting to know and trust, and becoming very fond of, and sort of co-creating something. And that is really, really different than the way that I normally live my daily life. And it is hugely gratifying and affirming and supportive. And it's strengthening everything that I'm doing outside of there. And I'm realizing as we have this conversation that part of the reason I've been being so stressed out and fearful, is the concern that that the people, that a couple of people who may have a little bit different agenda and may actually be being intentionally disruptive. Really, it's that I'm afraid of losing. It's not that they might mess up my event, but it's that they might mess up those relationships. And so I think, and what I'm realizing as we're talking is that those relationships themselves and building those relationships, you know what, that really is my spiritual practice these days. And I'm not going to lose that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Nancy, in what ways can a spiritual practice of self-care deepen your justice work?
I was thinking while you were talking, while Karen was talking about the relationships that I've come to have with the people in that gratitude group and the people in our huddle, in our women's neighborhood huddle group and so on. And I think that kind of community are probably what make it possible to keep going when I do get discouraged. So in a way, meeting with that huddle group once a month is self-care, because it's meeting with people who share values, who care deeply about the same kinds of concerns that I have. And so even going to that meeting is self-care, because of that community feeling that then helps support the kinds of things that I want to be involved in. So I guess that's what I would say, that it helps me have the strength and the courage to go out and continue to do the work and be involved in the things that I care about.
I think that balance between having that there and then having this awareness that you can pull away from that, you can leave for a few days and it'll still be there, and you will have helped to have built it, but it has, a life of its own, kind of whether you're actually present in any, you don't have to be present in every single freaking moment for that, for that coalition to continue to exist.
Thank you. Ashley?
We're a little short on time, and our folks have said so much good stuff that I'll turn it over to you. I'll skip myself.
In lieu of the time, can we just maybe go around and talk about one takeaway, share one takeaway from today's call, and then after that, we'll have Ashley close us out.
Well, yeah, I mean, even though I came in really late, just the mention and the reminder of the ABC that you raised, being able to actually speak with you, because I watched and listened to you night after night at the Justice for Jamar, but you were always like up on a flatbed truck preaching amazingly and being charismatic. And so it's great to actually have a chance to sort of chat. And I'm taking away the reminder of the goose story, and I'm going to bring that back to my group.
And for me, I think certainly, I mean, I've taken 3 pages of notes, so I'm taking away a lot of takeaways here, but definitely the ABCs of self-care too, and the way you've defined those in a deeper and more complex way than I would have thought about them if I were just reading them on a piece of paper. So that's going to be helpful for me, and I'm going to share that with others as well. Giving due credit, of course, to you guys for this workshop.
Yeah, for me, my real revelation is around the idea that awareness is impossible without community, and just the framing of that. More and more into, none of this is just stuff that we do individually, whether it's self-care or activism or learning or whatever it is that we're talking about. It's actually impossible to be human by ourselves. you know, that's the that's the concept that's inherent in so many traditions. But for me, that idea that awareness, it's not just about like me getting to know my true inner self by myself in a corner on a mountain while I meditate. It's actually about like, am I surrounding myself with the people and the experiences in my life that are going to help me be more aware, not just of myself, but of the incredibly interactive fibers of the ecosystem of community. How about you, Pastor Dan?
The takeaway I'm coming away from is just the power of connection, of being able to be in this space and place now, here today on this convening call, and being connected to folks that are doing work again. I've been invited into this place where I can see others that are doing other work on the same battlefield. And so that's encouraging to know that, you know, there's someone at Obama putting in work. It's encouraging to know that the People's Coalition, that there's someone, you know, putting in work for justice in real ways. And so that was my takeaway, of the connectedness of people to that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you, Danny, for leading us through this conversation and for sharing your own story as a part of it. I want to thank Karen and Nancy for being a part of the phone call and sharing vulnerably and reflectively about, you know, what brought you here today, as well as where you are when you think of these concepts. Yeah, I think this kind of thing, you know, my last little comment here would be that, you know, spiritual practice can look so many different ways. You know, it doesn't necessarily just look like sitting in a room by yourself reading poetry or praying or meditating or whatever. It is, you know, it's our relationships, it's our activities, it's anything that is done with intention and attention, and whatever it is in a particular phase of your life that helps you to show up ready for your next shift, I think is it. So Danny, thank you again for your leadership on this call. And for those of you who are watching this after the fact, please feel free and reach out to Danny and tell him, honk at him a little bit and tell him how much you appreciate him. MUUSJA's statewide organizer has his own email now. So he is MUUSJA.organizer@gmail.com. You can get in touch with him there. You can always find me at MUUSJA1, number 1, at gmail.com. A couple of things I want to just put on all of your radar. These are monthly convening calls that happen. We'll have another one in October. We'll announce the topic closer to the time, but they're scheduled right now for the third Tuesday of every month. So the next one, I believe, is October 17th, 7 to 8:30 p.m. I also want to let everybody know that we are currently signing folks up for our covenant groups, small online groups that meet via Zoom like this for deep conversation and listening on a monthly theme that intersects with justice. And Danny will be leading those small groups. It's an incredible opportunity to get to connect with Danny and with other justice leaders around the state who are interested in doing communal spiritual practice of deepening and grounding and being in relationship. And finally, I want to invite you all personally to MUUSJA's annual celebration and fundraiser, which we are calling Radical Collaboration. It will be at First Universalist Church on Thursday, October 5th, from 6 to 8:30 p.m. We will be featuring food by the sous chef, who is incredible if you haven't had their food before. We will also have a guest speaker, the Reverend Karen Van Fossen, who is the minister of our congregation in Bismarck, Mandan, who will be talking about the spiritual practice of showing up, of being an ally, and how her congregation, which is located about 40 miles from the Standing Rock Reservation, and was the only congregation in the entire state of North Dakota that made, off of the Standing Rock Reservation, that made any public commitment to the water protectors during the Dakota Access Pipeline struggle last year. Karen and her congregation continue to be in deep relationship with Indigenous people, those connections that got built there, and she'll be talking about her story. So please come help us support things like this, Danny in his new position, and the connections that we're building over time. So thanks to everybody for being a part of this call this evening. We are recording it. It'll be up on the web sometime soon, so feel free and share it with your friends.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you.
everybody. Good night.